to allow Brittany to participate virtually. She had something come up that she wasn't able to be here in person. And as you remember, we approved that change in the bylaws and they just have to get permission. So we have to vote on that. And she's not currently here. Well, we'll give it until 5 o'clock before we do that. While we're waiting for 5 o'clock to get here, I'd like to welcome our visitors. If you would just kind of say who you are so that everybody in the room knows who you are. We'll start with Ms. Eager.
Hi, I'm Patricia Eager. I represent Palmyra on the Board of Supervisors. Welcome.
I'm Kathleen Kilpatrick, and the fall allergies have kicked in, so forgive my voice. I live in Fort Union, and I'm a classmate of Loretta's at leadership development. I wish we were actually classmates.
Right. That's all right.
To take off 20 years.
I'm Curtis Putnam, former EDA board member.
Caroline Perrin, McGuire Woods. I'm here with TW Bruno.
Hi, yes, good afternoon, TW Bruno.
And EDA members, if you'd introduce yourselves so our guests know who you are.
We want to start
Start with you.
Valerie Palamantin, I'm the vice chair.
Ben Hudson, and I'm the treasurer for the EDA.
Loretta Johnson Morgan, member of EDA.
And Josh Bauer, member at large, EDA.
And Rudy Garcia, I'm the current chair. So,
Brittany just popped in.
oh, great. So I would entertain a motion from the board to approve virtual attendance for Brittany Gray, one of our other members. So move. A second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0. Who's taking notes?
I will attempt to, and we have the recording.
Okay, good. All right, so the first thing up on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. You should have received a copy of them from our secretary, who, by the way, is not going to be here for a couple of meetings. She's taken a short leave of absence while she deals with some family issues. Thank you for reminding me of that, Valerie. I would entertain a motion to approve the treasurer or the minutes of the September meeting.
I motion that we approve the minutes from the September 12th meeting.
And second, please. Second. So moved by Loretta, second by Ben. Any discussion or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Brittany, can you hear us?
I can, aye.
Okay, thank you. Chair votes aye, 6-0. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Schmack, who is going to introduce our speaker, and we will go from there.
Oh, okay. So we have TW Bruno here with us from McGuire Woods. He is a bond attorney, basically.
That works.
He does the bond presentation portion of the VIDAs and the VEDAs. So if you were to attend that, that is mentioned later in our presentation. You would be seeing TW Bruno there. And I've worked with him a couple of times in the city of South Oak with some bond financing. So he's here to speak about bonds and the whole world of bonds as it relates to the.
Well, thank you all for having me. Happy to be here. Jennifer told me that you all were, I think, sort of getting back up and running as a body, and just a little presentation is supposed to, I guess, take a little bit of a deep dive into bonds, which is just one of the many things that you're authorized under your enabling statutes to do. So, and again, what you always wanted to know, but may have been afraid to ask. And I'll say, as I go through this, feel free to stop me and make it a conversation. That doesn't have to be me talking at you for the whole presentation.
Wrong way.
Okay, got it. So I wouldn't be a lawyer and doing my job if I didn't put a big old disclaimer up front. So consider yourself disclaimed. So when an EDA is asked to issue bonds, and like so many things that, and I have hard copies. If anybody needs a hard copy as well, just let me know. So many things and so many things about what we'll touch on here as part of the bond process. I guess to take a step back, Virginia is what's called a Dillon rule state, which means that local governments have limited powers, and they only have the powers that are expressly put in the state code or what, and the Constitution of Virginia in order to be able to do things. And that also applies to development authorities and the IDA Act there. So when we talk about an IDA or an EDA being asked to issue bonds for a project, well, we have to be able to point to language in the state code that says that they can. And so this is just a quick list of sort of the, I would say probably 80 to 90% of the universe of bond projects that EDAs get asked to issue. Every once in a while, there's like a weird squirrely one that might, you would fit under here, but generally speaking, we're talking about facilities for some sort of 501c3 entity, whether that's healthcare, retirement community, your run-of-the-mill nonprofit YMCA. They're eligible for those types of financings. Museums, other nonprofits. Local and then state and local governments are allowed to have bonds issued through EDAs. And then there are some, manufacturing type things. We won't go into a lot of that detail because that just doesn't happen very much anymore. And then potentially you see things like stadiums. So if the football team ever figures out where they want to be located, that bonds for that project might get issued through a development approach as well. Again, depending upon the ultimate structure. So with that in mind, that you have to have an eligible project, I think the other key thing for the development authority to keep in mind here is that under the state code, the EDA obligation on the bonds is non-recourse to that EDA. Your job is to facilitate access to basically the tax exempt bond market. And so you are acting as a conduit issuer for some ultimate entity that is receiving the benefit of those bond proceeds. Again, they're technically under the code, an EDA could issue bonds for a project, but by and large, the EDAs are going to be issuing projects with a specific borrower in mind, because again, we have to sort of tie it back to the definition in the state code about what's an authorized facility to be issued. So, and under the state code, the EDA's obligation is non-recourse. It is limited to, and it can be limited in different ways depending upon the transaction, but effectively it is limited to the payments that come from the ultimate user of the project that is and again, because it is that pass-through there is no obligation, and the state code requires that we put in every bond that gets issued under that act, that disclaimer there that it's not basically not a full faith and credit obligation of the development. So we have a universe where there are the types of facilities that are eligible, and again, because the development authority is facilitating access to tax exempt borrowing at its core. You can issue taxable bonds, and that may happen, but effectively you're accessing or helping people access the tax exempt market, and the benefit to that is you can borrow at a lower rate from the lenders, they're willing to offer a lower rate than they would if they were lending on a taxable basis because they get the benefit of the tax exempt. And so that's a benefit that's embedded in both the federal tax code, but then also Virginia state, income taxes. Your bonds would be exempt under there as well. But when we get into the tax exempt world, there are then the universe gets divided yet again into two buckets, and those two buckets are governmental bonds and then what get called private activity bonds. And again, you look when you're making that distinction, you look through to the ultimate user / owner of the facility that's being financed. So governmental bonds are bonds that are either sort of owned and or occupied and used by some sort of governmental. And so that can be a county administration building, it can be a library, it could be a courthouse. When I worked on a project in Suffolk, it was the Health and Human Services building that was a shared office between city health department and state health department. Because of convoluted structures, we've financed facilities for VDOT through development authorities as well, for big sort of projects where they have a lot of repair and removal equipment for snow and ice and stuff like that. So we have governmental bonds, and then private activity bonds are the ones where your ultimate user is a private party. Surprise. And a lot of those, again, are 501c3. So even though those may be not, and they are not for profit entities, the tax code looks at them as a private entity rather than a state or local government. And then private activity bonds, as you can see, look. And then that gets further delineated sort of into two other buckets. Again, all the ones that are issued for different 501c3 types, and we sort of talked about those. And then another for what are sort of called exempt facilities. So those might be bonds that are used by a private entity, but they're of a type that the federal tax code wants to grant them access to taxable farmland. And you can see there from the list that they are solid waste, sewage, airports, residential, low-income type housing projects, that type of stuff. And again, that's just the way that the federal
So
tax
does
code.
ask a question?
Yeah.
So we have a solid waste company here in the county
Mhm.
that does single stream recycling. If they wanted to do an expansion, they could apply for us to for a bond.
Depending on the type of project, yes, they could come to you to ask you to finance the new facility or a component of the facility. And that's really what it ends up being, is a component of the facility, because of the limits on what you can spend your tax exempt dollars on. Nowadays, you can't build the whole thing 100% tax exempt finance. You're going to need to use either equity or taxable bonds. But yes, potentially you could do that. And there are plenty of bonds for, I mean, even just sort of solid waste, landfill, recycling centers, that type of stuff. That does happen.
Thanks.
So once you've got a project and once you've got a borrower, then there are some basic sort of blocking and tackling approval requirements that go into issuing the bonds. Now, we hope, and I would suggest that typically the borrower that comes to the EDA for financing, they and their counsel will be responsible for making sure that these are sort of technically complied with in a lot of instances. The basic functioning of the authority, do you have a quorum at your meeting? Did you post your FOIA notice that where you were supposed to post it? Has everybody taken their oaths? Has everybody filed their conflict of interest forms? All that type of stuff you need to and will be responsible for, just like you would for any other conduct of your business. But these types of approvals, well, we're going to talk about public hearings and TEFRA, which is a federal tax return, that type of approval. You're not going to be responsible for documenting that, but you will be an integral part of that process because you're the issuer of the bonds. And actually, that's maybe something to talk about. The structure of it is usually sort of two layers. Again, because we have three parties here. We have the people who are lending the money, or buying the bonds. We have the authority who is issuing the bonds, and we have the borrower who is ultimately using the proceeds of the bonds. And so the issuer, the EDA, issues a bond to the lender, the bondholder, and that's the debt instrument, and that's the document by which there's an obligation to pay. Well, underneath of that, the borrower issues some obligation to the EDA to evidence its obligation to make those payments. And then what happens is that obligation is typically assigned to the benefit of the ultimate lender who's getting the payment. So usually it's a note, but it could be, frankly, you can just embed it in a loan agreement, because effectively the money comes from the lender to the EDA. EDA makes a loan of the bond proceeds to the borrower. The borrower uses them and then has an obligation to repay the loan and have to go back up the chain. But when we talk about approving bond projects, there again, we look to both the state code and we look to the federal tax code for the approval requirements. So your IDA Act and then Internal Revenue Code. And so the way that the IDA Act works is it punts the decision on the approval process to the federal tax code. So it says if the federal tax code requires a public hearing, then you have to have a public hearing under the IDA Act. And so what that means is that you need to have a public hearing for all of those private activity bonds, and that's where the word TEFRA comes in, which is an acronym for an act actually from the 1980s. It predates 1986 tax reform act. But what that act requires is that if you're issuing bonds for the benefit of a private entity, then you need to have a public hearing for that to allow the public notice and an opportunity to be heard on it. And it then also has to be approved by the governmental unit that has jurisdiction over the area in which are issued bonds. So the federal code would require, if you were to issue bonds for a nonprofit or the recycling facility, that the Board of Supervisors would also have to approve that issue. Again, they're not passing on the credit worthiness, just like you don't pass on the credit worthiness of it, but you have to approve it. You can think of it essentially as a sort of a not in my backyard requirement for private activity.
So if we issue a bond to an entity in another jurisdiction, their jurisdiction.
Well, so that's the next point. Yes. So and that is that could be both a state law requirement and a federal law requirement. But let's say there's a project in Albemarle that needs financing, and they come to you for any number of reasons. Yes, you can't reach into Albemarle to do a financing unless you get the approval of that Albemarle Board of Supervisors. You also need the Fluvanna supervisors as well, but you can't reach into another locality to do a project without that locality's consent, because it again avoids sort of the shopping around for somebody who's willing to in the landfill scenario, right? Like if the county where the landfill is located doesn't want to do it and doesn't want the project there, you don't want somebody to be able to finance it without having any sort of local approval. Now, that only applies to the new money financing. If you're if once the project built, that sort of jurisdictional approval goes away because the cat's out of the bag. So, and there is a timing requirement under the state code that you have to get from the EDA approval to the governing body approval within 60 days. So it's typically not a problem. It actually really only becomes a problem around this time frame because things get canceled on holidays, and weather, and that type of stuff. But typically not an issue. And so this next slide gets at what I was talking about, where you have to have your Fluvanna board of supervisors will have to approve them if you're reaching into another jurisdiction. And now you could have, like the YMCA in the Richmond area, they have locations, Hanover, Petersburg, Chesterfield, and Henrico, they have it all over the place. Well, you know, if you wanted to issue through the one Sweden should have gone through the town of Ashland's EDA. And there, if your approvals and your public hearing is close enough, you don't have to have public hearings all over the place. But if you're financing a project or projects, one of which is located in Arlington County and one of which is located in Montgomery County, well, you need to have public hearings in both places. Sometimes you get by with just a public hearing at your EDA level, and then the governing body does not have to. So some folks like to just. And then again, sort of going back to other sort of key things to keep in mind, knowing and making sure you have quorum, having your electronic meeting stuff approved, and making sure all those boxes are checked is always important, because you can meet as a group and do things without a quorum and without people who have taken their oath. But from a bond perspective, you want to make sure all that's buttoned up. So we might have people have to come back and take care of that later. And then to just really talk about a very sort of narrow and fine point, but one that I think people sort of maybe anecdotally know about in terms of bonds, is this concept called bank qualification. And what that means is it's really a limit on the availability of the tax exemption on bonds to banks and financial institutions. So because banks and financial institutions get to borrow from the Fed at a discounted rate relative to just other companies that get to borrow, they're limited in their ability to take advantage of the tax exemption on bonds, except in what are called bank qualified bonds. And those bank qualified bonds are bonds that are less than $10 million that are issued by what are sort of classified as small issuers, meaning people that have not issued more than 10 bonds in a calendar year. We don't see that a ton anymore in a lot of instances, because banks have figured out a way around the limit on the tax exemption, and so they can offer rates that are competitive with that without having to go that route. But smaller and more community-oriented banks don't have that level of sophistication, so they may still be looking for bank qualified financing. And what that means is, and the way that we count bank qualification, it rolls up through the county. So if for instance, the county issued bonds in any amount, then the bank qualified issuance of the EDA would be affected by that. And so you may run into instances where the project's in Albemarle, and Albemarle has issued $10 million of bonds already in a given year, and the borrower needs to have tax exemption in order for them to get the most competitive rate. Well, you can come to Fluvanna, have the Fluvanna EDA issue it for the bank qualification purposes, because maybe Fluvanna hasn't issued any tax exempt debt that year, and so their sort of limit is available to them. And that would be a reason why you do that and why you would come into a different jurisdiction. So, but again, you see it a little bit here and there around the edges. One thing that's important for us as the bond counsel on that bank qualification is that in order to satisfy the requirements of the IDA Act, there has to be a nexus between the borrower and the locality that's doing the bond issuing for them, because it really is supposed to foster economic development or industrial development within that locality. And so we look for things like, how many employees does this borrower have that happen to maybe live in your county, or projects that get done there, or benefits that accrue to the locality. So we wouldn't see typically a project, again, in Albemarle get financed by the EDA in Northampton County on the Eastern Shore, because the nexus between those is too big. But again, Albemarle, Charlottesville, those types of localities are close enough where there would be some benefits that we think state law would permit the issuance of those bonds. So that, I think, ends my prepared materials, but again, happy to answer any questions that you might have about it. And again, my information, I think, is on the materials, so feel free to call me. Happy to answer questions that come up after the meeting. Any questions from the board? Any questions from our visitors? The last bond that we did was to build the soccer center in Albemarle County. That was the last one we did. And then prior to that, we worked with Camden School. And that's all we've done in the last 7 years. Yeah, that was before my bond.
Thank you. So we can a little bit of revenue. Yeah.
For the board, that's the way we can generate revenue. Right now, that's the only option available to us, other than asking the board of supervisors to fund us with additional dollars to do some other activities. So it's our advantage to issue bond when they become available and when the interest is out there. Anybody else have questions? I just have sort of a procedural question. Sure. On the actual, because I haven't seen this yet. So is there a contract, bond contract that goes with the bond issuance between EDA and borrower?
Yes, actually, and so it can take a lot of forms, but then, at its core, it's a loan agreement.
Sure.
Yeah, but that's exactly right. So there's a loan agreement between EDA and the issuer, and different issuers have evolved over time to where they may have some specific requirements associated with it. It just sort of depends on the locality and the level of detail you want to get into your bond program. But yeah, at its core, it's a loan agreement. Yeah, and so we get this layered contract, right? So the county sends us something, the borrower sends us something, and then our attorney kind of puts the two of them together, and then we have to sign like the both of the documents.
So the loan agreement needs to be approved by the folks.
Well, no. So the board of supervisors, they really just approve the concept of the financing. So they're basically just saying that they're okay in concept with the borrower having a bond issued by the EDA to finance a project in their locality. Yes, Catherine.
Question. I'm not sure how to express this. Are you saying that, does that retain become an obligation of the county or are they one and the same?
Well,
In a sense?
you're right. No, the counties and the PDA's obligations on the bonds is the same, which is that they have none. There is no obligation on it, and there's no credit risk or credit exposure to either the EDA or the county by virtue of the bonds. The bond market and banks and investors that might buy bonds that are sold on the public market all understand that this is a conduit scenario that is done to facilitate access to the market. And so, the EDA's name will appear on the bond, but typically there's a, parenthetical that says that this is being issued for, Westminster Canterbury or the soccer, federation or whatever that's using.
And
So
there are-
there's no impact to the county's
Correct.
bonds rating.
Correct.
Right.
And yeah, there's also no county or state funds involved. So the funding is done by a private entity.
Right. There's no obligation to put any money up.
We don't have to go print the money.
And even in a meltdown, horrible scenario where the entity stops paying, nobody's looking or going to expect to look to anything other than that borrower and what they put up as collateral, because there's a loan agreement, but on the side, there's a whole host of other things that you would typically see in your run-of-the-mill loan transactions from a bank to a business, right? There's a pledge and a security interest and all that sort of stuff.
And in some cases, they have to put additional stuff in, like if they're doing some development, they have to put money in place to make sure that they do what they say they're going to do.
Right, and they might have to put a mortgage on their property and all that type of stuff, which again, is outside of sort of your involvement with things, but it exists to help make sure that the bondholders ultimately get paid.
Anybody else?
So in the last year, have you seen a lot of interest in these different types of bonds? I know the tax exempt ones are obviously the qualified ones are the most common that we're seeing. Are you seeing any more bonds or manufacturing?
Yeah, we don't typically see a lot of those. And part of the reason is that those are subject to a dollar limit where it just doesn't quite make sense to be able to try to finance something. That the limit, the bank qualification limit and the manufacturing bond limit were set in 1986, and they have not been indexed for inflation. So they have remained static for
Sort of like our tax code.
so things have gotten more expensive to finance and to build, but the code hasn't grown along with them. And so people have just sort of evolved away from that. The other limit on a lot of those is that the way that you depreciate your assets if you take a tax exemption for the financing, you have to take a straight line depreciation rather than accelerated depreciation, which a lot of private companies don't like, and it affects their financing in a way and finances, I should say, in a way that makes it sort of prohibitive to do the benefit they get from the tax rate is not as great as the benefit they get from the accelerated depreciation. And some of that is just that interest rates are a lot lower now than they were in 1982, 1983. Even though rates are going up, they're still lower, and that's part of what's driving that too.
And then a couple of years ago, was it the state came out with its own financing arm? So are you seeing a lot of the localities losing out on these funds versus the state?
So there is a statewide, there are a couple of statewide issuers that people who are doing different types of projects could go to have issue bonds on their behalf. I wouldn't say we're seeing people lose out to them. It's more that the types of issuers that should be going there. The reason to go to the statewide issuer, it's called the Virginia Small Business Financing Authority, is the big one. And the reason to go there is that sort of multi-site, multi-county organization like a YMCA, where you might have to get approval from 5 different elected bodies. Well, if you go to the VSBFA, you can do projects in Chesterfield and Petersburg and Ashland and Hanover, but you don't need to get approval from all of those localities. You go through a different approval process with the governor. And once you do that, then that cuts off all the other approvals that you need. Now, if people go through there, the VSBFA does have a program where it shares the fees that it generates from projects within a given locality with that locality. So you don't get 100% of the fee because they keep some of it for their administrative costs, but they do share an percentage. But anytime you submit an application to them, you have to say, well, we're financing projects in these 3 localities, and the approximate percentage of the money being spent is whatever, a third, or 50, 25, 25, and they allocate the fee based on your estimates of the bond money spent.
Does that go to the authority or to the county?
It's supposed to be paid to the board.
Statewide and stuff.
Yeah.
But now I thought that they were a point or 2 lower. So the state was a little bit more competitive than the localities. But this was
Well,
years ago.
it depends. So the fee that an EDA can charge, the maximum fee that you could charge is 1/8 of 1% of the principal amount of the bonds on a sort of declining balance basis. So you can charge an upfront fee, but the limit on the upfront fee is capped by sort of what the payment stream would be if you charged 1/8 of 1% of the outstanding principal amount on basically the anniversary of the bond, that the bonds are outstanding. Did you write that down?
I did.
I will say,
This was 112.
well, most people don't have the 1/8 fee because that's the highest that you can do. I think most issuers, to be competitive, have settled at 1/10 of 1%, and that's what the state issuer charges.
Okay.
And so if people are purely fee shopping, which I don't think we see much because in the grand scheme of things, that doesn't make or break the deal. And quite frankly, if we were advising them, we'd say, you should go to your local issuer because you want to keep it local. You're in the community, you're investing in the community anyway. You get a lot of intangible benefits from going that route.
Good village prices.
I would agree, and easy to lose, so it's not worth it.
So TW, we just want to thank you very much.
Oh, gosh.
And hope this stuff you can home with.
There you go. Thank you very
Appreciate it
much.
very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Good.
Okay. Moving on to the next part of the agenda. The treasurer's report is attached to your packet. We got that out in advance.
We got it this morning,
Okay, so
and I actually printed the grid lines for you too.
you would take a look at that. Ben, you want to just give us a highlight of what's going on with it?
Yes, thanks, Jim, and good recall. If you look at line 134, not a whole lot of activity. But line 134 is the first activity, which is a payment to the attorney Bowling for $862.50. These are expenditures. The second expenditure was $135 to Fluvanna for an ad, and then we had 2 deposits to the account and the amount of interest deposit, 1.7 times 2. We did the arithmetic on that. Outstanding balance as of October 31st was $25,231.01. And the only activity we had since then was payment for post office tax.
We did not receive the county from the.
Submitted for that.
I really did.
I'll check
I
it out
didn't
later.
It may be in our post office.
I'll still check.
And that's pretty much the wrap up on the on the opportunity funds. There have been no changes to the opportunity funds. It's steady up. So, questions? That concludes.
Any questions for the treasurer's report? I'd entertain a motion to approve the treasurer's report as presented.
So moved.
Second, moved by Valerie, second by Josh. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Brittany?
Aye.
Thank you. Chair votes aye, 6-0. All right, let's see. Thank you. That's you. Just remember to keep an eye on our time.
Yes, I'll be quick. There's a lot here to cover, but I'll be quick. So the summary of economic activity for the December, or for October, rushing to December, October 2022, existing business visits conducted, that was 6 of them. This is actually going out and meeting with different businesses in the community. This does not include all of the other business activity or interactions with them. That's also reflected in their activities and spots. Partner agencies, networking events, conferences attended, there were 19 of those. Other activities, 19. Prospects and real estate inquiries, there were 3. And small business referrals, this is where I refer to the Small Business Development Center, or CIC. We had 1 of those. Another update, the Economic Development Strategic Plan was adopted on September 21st for the Board of Supervisors. This happened after our last meeting, so I didn't get a chance to report on it. I have included a copy in your actual meeting materials here, and we have uploaded it to the Economic Development address.
Any significant changes? Any significant mods to it as a result of?
No significant changes. We changed some wording. Look at Cashew, Ms. Eager. We changed some wording on the actual tracking of business visits and tracking of businesses, so that they'll be voluntary and not. So that's kind of the only big tweak that we made. Well, and I'm using arrows. A couple other things to report on. We had a groundbreaking at Route 250 at Edgecombe Road for the first building. It's going to be 25,000 square feet. This is a building.
That's the one on the north side of 250.
Yes, right next to the new Stewart Tools. This building will be occupied by Pod Storage Container Company. A lot of that will be inside. We've worked a lot with them to do a lot of buffering and screening.
Is it an actual pods warehouse?
Yes, it's pods.
Those are very cool.
Yes, so they're actual pods containers that are going to be stored inside this building. So that's the first of 4 to 5 buildings that we have. There'll be 250,000 square foot of industrial flex space available in our northern corridor. If you're following the market right now, there is no industrial space from Waynesboro all the way to Louisa. So really excited to have this for our business, our expanding businesses to stay here in Fluvanna. We also had a ribbon cutting for a small business, Lake Yoga and Wellness. They opened in September. Their ribbon cutting was delayed to our little hurricane we had. They're in Crofton Plaza, Building 2. She actually specializes in adaptive yoga. And so she's really a neat format there. Also, we had here in the village, Scrappy Elephant has collaborated with 2 Labs Coffee and Local Eats to have like a little pop-up coffee shop type of thing. You can grab and go sandwiches on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We're just testing the market to see the demand for the area. So we're hoping that that's really going to take off. They've sold out their first 2 days. So we're waiting to see how tomorrow goes. So Tuesdays and Thursdays for sandwiches, and you can get coffee Tuesday through Saturday. Quad County Business Summit. We had the Quad Tank Pitch Competition. I'm trying to rush. This is what happens when I try to rush. Was held on October 12th. 19 businesses from 5 counties applied, 6 from Fluvanna. So we led the market on small business participation.
Some of those 6 were some of the same folks who applied for our pitch contest.
And so you'll see 2 familiar faces on here. They do a first round, preliminary round, and we had 2 semifinalists from Fluvanna, one from Orange and one from Green. So Sweetheart Emporium and Herbert's Wine Jelly competed. Unfortunately, Southern Revere won in Louisa, but very excited for the exposure. I've had people texting me asking me to bring them jelly when I go to the partner meetings.
Yeah, the group that won were very, very, very polished. I mean, it was obvious that was not their first rodeo. I mean, it was 2-people team, and they had their transitions down. It was sweet. They did a great job.
They had pitched a year or 2 years prior. So it does show the more that we can get our businesses to pitch and get this small business education exposure, which is the next segue, it really does help them.
I'm sorry. What was the prize? They're winning.
$6,000.
Can I take it off of there? It's $6,750. I'm reading on that little tiny check up in the corner.
That was the first prize.
It was only
Winner takes all.
Okay, winner take all.
Yes. The business education series, this is the series where the Economic Development Authority, the Chamber, and the Economic Development Office all partnered up with Small Business Development Center to bring in this business education series. It's going to ebb and flow depending on what the topic is. You can see that we had a very popular topic, and so we had them come back a second time. So in August, we had Rebecca Haydock come and do the writing the business plan. We had 6 attendees, not including Rudy. And then in September, we had Build Your Social Media with Greg Durazio. We had 13 attendees, not including Rudy or myself. We were both there too. And then in October, we had Greg come back and actually extend that workshop out, include another component to it. So we were hosted by Harvard Hills. What's was cool about that is we actually also collaborated with the Scottsville Chamber to kind of bring in some additional people. We had one come from Buckingham. So Buckingham, and then we had 2 from Scottsville. So really excited to continue to partner with our greater community. And last but not least, for me, we are continuing to have the Small Business Development Center come into Fluvanna once a month. We're having walk-in office hours from 1 to 4:30. We will extend that next year. We're just finishing out the holiday season this year. These are some of the variety of services that they provide. We're actually moving that to the chamber office, just so that we have a little bit better access on the street versus having to climb the stairs to go to the Beaver building. So we're hoping that we'll continue with getting some foot traffic there. Rebecca Haydock also did a brief a summary of year in review to the board of supervisors at their last meeting. And I think it was well received. There was a lot of information going on.
Yeah, our county uses more of SBDC's resources than any of the other small counties.
We lead. So
Yeah.
we are right behind Charlottesville and Albemarle County. So we're really excited that but we do have a lot of small business champions in our community. You know, the chamber is very active. The EDA, you guys refer all the time as well. And that's one of the reports that I've been tracking over the last year is how much we're referring out. Just so we can see what our bang for our buck is, because we're paying the Fluvanna is funding the SBDC at $10,000. I believe the ask is $15,000 this year. It's a per capita equation, so it's the same for every locality. Yeah, so more to come on that. Oh, there is one more. So the VIDA, I mentioned it earlier when TW was here. It's going to be virtual this year again. If you have not gone through it, I highly recommend it. I actually did it. That's how I kind of knew he did this class, and Sandy had finished it before. It kind of runs you through everything. It's all done now. We did the FOIA with Sandy. We've done the bond attorney. So it's a great opportunity.
What's
to
the
learn.
registration cost?
I think it's $90. But it might be lower now. It might be 50 because it's virtual, and it's half sessions in the morning. So it's in the morning from like 9 to 12 or something. So I can email this back out to you if you like.
Question, is that archived so that I can register and see it later?
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's.
In other words, it's recorded, so I can.
I'm not sure. I can check with Connie.
And then I have a quick question, not a question so much, but just a comment regarding the Quad Conference pitch thing. So there's a winner take all. There's a winner take all, I understand that, and I guess this is to the records. So is there a way, or should we, or could we incentivize those people who maybe come in second or third who are from that? Can the board, would the board be out of line to do something like that?
That's a great question. And the short answer is I would love to be able to do something like that. And or be able to do another pitch competition like we did this year.
And the reason I ask it in that vein, because it seems to be a very a good format to identify polished small businesses. Granted, they might not have qualified for the big prize, but that doesn't take away from our opportunity to sort of incentivize businesses that are coming out with a platform that's already been established. So we don't have to redo it.
We don't have to do it.
Right. We already know.
We don't have to. They can just give it to you.
There's nothing to stop us from putting that into new business and either doing it in arrears or moving forward for next year. It'd be a lot easier if we could figure out a way to get some more money and keep.
And this should be, because you have to run a case on other things of CLC. CS.
Where we'd find another grant to incentivize small businesses, that would be a great opportunity for us.
Would the board, would the supervisors be willing to help with that?
Oh,
That's a great question. What we need is a champion on the board of supervisors. And we have not yet developed that champion.
I just hate to see our small business leaders go out to a quad conference and come in second. And get a fake, even if they don't get some sort of monetary thing, just a plaque.
We've had at least one, if not two businesses compete in each of the Quad County pitch competitions ever since we started.
One. We did have one.
We
We
had
did
one.
have, one.
Yeah,
I think that's.
That was Reliable Rides.
Yeah.
So. But it's a
These
great
are all great
question.
questions.
So I would, we're gonna have to go into closed session.
We can actually, there's no new updates. Cool.
Yeah, what, before the closed session?
Yeah.
Okay, let's not do closed session.
We're not gonna do.
Because we don't have to do it. Okay, so let's quickly move to public comments. Because I want to get to there's a couple things on new business. Yes, ma'am.
Your indulgence to move forward,
Sure.
just because my voice is really
Sure. Just for the record, Kathleen, if you would just state your name, where you live,
sure.
all that jazz.
Kathleen Tolpark. I live on Red Bank Lane in Fork Union. And I'm here to provide some comments on the economic development strategic plan in the hopes.
Kathleen, I'm going to go ahead and put a timer on. So
Okay. And what is the timeline? In the hopes that we can find some solutions to a couple of, I think, pretty glaring areas. There's a lot of good stuff there. One of the things that I was kind of distressed as Jennifer knows, to find in that list of things that will be subject to joint marketing and promotion was the absence of heritage tourism, which, as the state and federal data tells us, is the largest component of tourism, the largest growing component of tourism,
and integral as a driver for tourists who come to the area, even if they don't want to go to a museum or historic site. The data shows us, and it's well documented all across the country, that people want to travel in a place they refer to as authentic, by which they mean historic in nature. And they consider visiting historic sites both outdoor recreation and historic preservation or historic tourism. So, and we have an enormous ability to attract the heritage tourists, who, by the way, spends 2.5 times as much as other tourists and stays longer. We know that the tourists want that multifaceted experience, and your plan reflects that in terms of partnering with outdoor rec, for example, and wineries and whatever, but misses history altogether. And we have in this village and in that courthouse a gem of a resource to serve as the anchor of preservation activities and tourism. So I would like, I assume it's closed at this point in time, but surely there are going to be some implementation steps and some goals and strategies, and that needs to get back into the position, into place. It's a big omission. It really is. My second point is, and it's a similar one, and I cheered out loud and out of order when Jennifer talked about the little effort in the village to provide some food and drink. But if we're really going to enjoy tourism here, and we should, we're talking pre-pandemic, $27 billion industry and 237,000 jobs in town. So, and it's recovered since then at a rate of 87%. That's the federal statistic. So we've got to have tourism infrastructure. We have to have places where people can spend their money, in gift shops and restaurants and places to stay. And that too seems to me, it isn't just about marketing. It's about bringing people here through joint marketing, through focusing on what we have. And please add history back in, because we've got it. This courthouse is one of the most important in the country. And that's coming from, that's coming from the 18-year director of the Department of Historic Resources and a national expert in that regard.
Thanks,
but we also have to have an effort put behind those big chunks that involve tourism infrastructure.
Thank you.
That's my plea.
Curtis?
Just
Yeah, go ahead and identify yourself for the record.
Okay, Curtis Putnam, 16408 James Madison Highway, Virginia. I just want to remind the board that you all provide a very important function for the county, that you are not a rubber stamp. And you examine the issues, understand them, know what's going on. Lean on your bottom counsel when you have to. So, you can do this.
Thank you. Ms. Eager, you're our only other visitor. Do you have any comments you'd like to address to the EDA? Good. You're welcome anytime we need. So, new business or unfinished business. We don't really have any unfinished business. So, new business. I would entertain a motion from the authority to authorize us to reimburse any of our members who have not yet attended the IDA. If they want to attend this, for them to register and submit their reimbursement.
So
A second? Okay. So
Is that the right?
that's me.
Okay.
So discussion. I attended that my first year on the committee, and it is eye-opening. So I would definitely recommend attendance. Any other questions or comments?
No, I believe that I attended there, it was reimbursed, but that was during COVID, so I've never. COVID brain gets fuzzy.
I just wanted to go on the record so that we can go ahead, you guys can go ahead and register and we get it approved in advance. That way the treasurer doesn't beat me up again.
Mhm. And it's good.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Brittany?
Do we need to vote on this? Do we?
Yeah.
Oh, I just saw that.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Brittany, did you hear the motion on the floor though?
Regarding the VIDA?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I heard it. Thank you. I intend to go to it as well.
Okay, any comments or questions?
No questions.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, all in favor of approving this motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Brittany?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, 6-0. Thank you very much. The only other piece of new business that I have is kind of take Kathleen's comments and let's see about putting that on a future agenda. One of the things that has to happen now that we have this plan is there has to be action items put underneath there. So maybe that's a good place to bring that back in, maybe pairing that up with some of the other organizations that are going to be doing some of the stuff. When I spoke to Kathleen earlier today, I told her, I said, when I got interviewed, it never even occurred to me to break out historical tourism as a separate section from tourism. And so I'm sure that it may have been simply an oversight on the part of the people who were asked the questions. And it may have been that there was no specific question about, are you in favor of historical tourism? Is there, I mean, I don't remember.
Money.
Yeah, I just don't remember what the question was, but.
So can I add? I think
Sure.
you were just getting. So the reason it wasn't fully built out in the strategic plan was we have a tourism strategic plan that was adopted by the board of supervisors.
Yeah.
Yes, February 21st, 2018. It's a 5-year plan. It expired during COVID, and I think they were going to pick it up last October, roughly. And we had an outgoing ed tech chair, Andy was coming off. But at the time, we all knew that the strategic plan was happening. So they wanted to hold off on the updating the tourism strategic plan, do economic development, and then come back. So it is intended that both of these two documents speak to each other and they complement each other. But this is the full-on tourism strategic plan. So I found it. This is for you.
There are a couple other things that I'd like to add. There has been a move to increase visibility of the arts.
Yes.
And that ties in very nicely with the tourism. This has been done through nonprofits and individuals. And I agree with Kathleen, the courthouse is a gem, so is the Old Stone Jail, so are the Rosenwald schools that are being preserved. These cannot be found anywhere else in the country. But the one negative, as far as the support for the infrastructure, talking about hotels, you need water.
Yes.
And until that happens, we're kind of in a bind.
Gotcha.
Yes, well, and the business infrastructure in general. So the big main focus of tourism is to bring the dollars here, bring people here, spend your money, dump your money and go home. You know, so that's the big thing. So you need I'm sorry, not residential, restaurants, as well as shops and lodging. And to your point, Valerie, we need at least 2 of those 3 components.
Yeah.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I have a question. Now, on the advertisement we have in the Fluvanna Review, do we have a blurb in there that says that these types of entities can can go into a bond agreement.
No, we have not done that yet,
Is it?
but there's nothing that stops us from doing that.
Okay.
We could do an article that talks about
Yeah.
the
advertise.
ability
Yeah.
to issue bonds and the types of bonds
Yeah,
and
we can-
who
yeah.
would be available. Yeah, we can absolutely do that.
That's it. Thank you.
Who wants to help me write that?
I will.
Dan, thank you for volunteering.
Just to circle back one more time to the infrastructure for historical tourism. If you've ever been to Eaglesmere, Pennsylvania, which is in the endless mountains in the middle of nowhere. And it is a destination because, not because of the, Marriott hotels, but because of the bed and breakfasts, the Airbnbs, and high-end dining. I mean, these tablecloths are lily white, and great food.
So we're
We
running
could
into,
do this
we're running
instead.
into Ed Tech's time, so I'll just close us by saying, we need to address this as an organization, but more importantly, the county needs to address it in the area of zoning.
Yep.
And usage.
Yep.
And convince Lake Monticello to allow for Airbnbs in the community. Because if they do that, then we
You got
can
it.
do the other piece. But that's where most of the houses in the community are. And if, we pull 5,000 houses out of the Airbnb market, we don't have an Airbnb market. So, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn so that we can apologize profusely to Ed Tech.
Okay.
All in favor? Brittany,
I.
chair votes aye. Ed Tech, we apologize profusely.